Imagine the ultimate betrayal as Suho, our fearless blade-wielding hero, is forced to his knees, surrounded by the very team he trusted with his life. His body shakes so hard his veins turn black from the poison. He coughs up blood and gasps for air, realizing too late that this poison is deadly, while his two so-called teammates laugh hysterically as they watch him slowly die. The party's tank hit him with a nasty smirk, mocking Suho for not joining their dirty scheme. But Suho wasn't about that kind of life. He was a true public servant who held fast to his morals and flat out refused to sell out or become corrupt. He had just stormed through a legendary nightmare zone, wiping out the terrifying beasts that lived inside one of the 5 disaster gates. Yet these scumbags are secretly keeping the portal wide open, refusing to seal it because their master plan is to leave just enough monsters alive to farm them forever, ensuring they keep their huge paychecks, fame, and VIP status while the threat exists, since no monsters means no spotlight, and they'd instantly lose all their power, a realization that hits Suo hard as he flashes back to all the grinding they did together, and how they bled side by side in hardcore raids where he literally put his life in their hands. Now they just stand there watching him fade away without a shred of guilt, trying to excuse their hit by blaming Suho for being the buzzkill while claiming the rest of the guild was ready to hustle, until suddenly the party's ranger steps up with a handout to offer a shady second chance. He says Suho will get the antidote if he joins their team. But Suho isn't a fool, so why would he ever trust the same snakes that poisoned him and left him to rot? Plus, he feels his life slipping away as his body burns out, the poison racing through his heart with no hope of survival left. But if he's going to the grave, he's dragging at least one of those traitors down with him, so Suo pushes his last bit of power out and lets a sharp, choking aura burst around him. 2 traitors freeze in terror while the sweating female caster screams for everyone to stand firm, but the panicked ranger is about to wet himself until Suho dashes forward in a blur, slicing off the tank's arm and cleanly beheading the loudmouth caster without missing a beat. The archer scrambles back just in time, ripping the healer away from the fatal blow, turning their earlier arrogance into sheer terror as the support panics and watches her healing spells fail to save the bleeding tank. Her jaw drops as she sees the wound cut off her magic, and though she shakes, locking eyes with Suho reveals that he is no longer dying but glowing with a power fueled by insane will. His weapon grew to become a glowing sword made of his own unbreakable spirit, forged from pure determination and ready to cut through anything. And taking that final perfect move costs him his last bit of life, and the rush of adrenaline fades instantly. So's legs give way, and his body finally gives out. He tumbles off the cliff into the dark, vanishing into silence, only for Suo to wake up in a screaming nightmare where firefighters drag him towards safety while his mind spins in a glitched-out fever dream, forcing him to realize he shouldn't be alive at all. He looks around in shock to see a giant portal open up in the city, letting hundreds of savage green goblins swarm the streets and jump on anyone alive, until Suho spots a broken subway sign half buried in the rubble that says Sinandorum Station. Boom, his mind snaps back to reality, realizing he isn't hallucinating as he stands in the exact same spot that was destroyed during a huge portal breach in the past, only to have a stray arrow suddenly shoot him in the back before he can even figure out how he got there. The guy screams and collapses, slamming both of them onto the ground as the hungry goblins rush right up to them. Even though the injured first responder begged Suo, without a single second of doubt, Suho grabbed the heavy blade, gauged the gap, and threw it with raw, animalistic power at the charging monster, the steel cutting through the air to pin the beast solidly to the ground just as a tap silenced it. But before the dust could settle, the world glitched and something strange popped right into his face. Neon letters floated in the air like a hologram video game, a system prompt that was literally throwing a welcome party for his awakening. He froze for a moment, feeling like he'd seen this screen before in his past life, and it asked him to pick his fighting style. His hand twitched on its own, inches from the warrior face, but he jerked it back just in time. Nope, not this run. He slammed on the brakes, whipped his head toward the cackling goblin pack, and let their high-pitched shrieks echo through the chaos. These tiny ugly gremlins strutted around acting super confident, giggling like they had already won the game. But our guy didn't even care at all. Without warming up, he threw himself straight into the swarm. He moved across the battlefield as smoothly as water, slipping past their heavy blows, as if they were nothing more than raindrops. An arrogant mobster tried to sneak up on him, but the moment he locked eyes with our hero, he froze in horror to see Suo already swinging the bloody axe he had just used. Suho had no patience left today, so before the ugly thing could even squeak, he slashed it apart with one smooth swing, shutting the monster up before it could ruin the air, and just to get the feel going, he grabbed a rusty short sword from the ground, and kept moving because he knew these mobs well. While a beginner would call them a nightmare, for a veteran who has crawled through hell, stomping these green rats was just like playing a tutorial level. He was a blur of motion, slicing through the crowd with such speed and precision that not a single drop of sweat fell, far surpassing everything he had done before. With just 3 minutes to spare, he turned the whole invading army into tiny pixels, wiping the zone clean so fast it felt like he was using cheat codes. And once the smoke settled, Suho looked at the blood dripping from his blade, realizing he'd let his adrenaline take over and was just mashing buttons on pure instinct instead of playing a smart game. Knowing that while going beast mode works, he desperately needed to stay calm in this ruthless world. After all, the universe didn't reset his timeline just to mess around. This was his ultimate chance to start fresh, and he had no intention of messing it up, so as a massive shower of glowing achievement notifications flooded his vision, the injured hero stared in total disbelief at the impossible massacre before Suho gave a quiet nod and turned his attention back to the floating screen. The argument was finally done, so he slammed the button to pick the healer class. The plan was set, so he walked straight up to the beaten man and calmly offered to fix his big cut, leaving the guy staring in stunned confusion. Just 5 minutes ago, he was using that teen as a human shield, and now the teen was acting like a medic, but Suho didn't wait to see if the numbers added up before he moved. He unleashed his healing magic, and a warm, calming energy instantly flowed over the deep gash. In the blink of an eye, the torn flesh knit itself back together perfectly. The responder was stunned to see the guy switching from a master assassin who just crushed the raid to someone casting support spells. Just as the poor man asked for a lore drop, the system flashed again, letting him grab his starter gear from the digital armory without even looking at the catalog. Knowing exactly what he needed, he summoned a basic iron longsword, the same trusted blade from his past life, and stepped up to face the swirling dungeon rift, sending a chill of pure anxiety through the older man as he marched alone into a fresh gate that looked like a death wish, though our hero had a massive loophole ready to save him. Gaining those weapon mastery perks before officially choosing his job was like having a secret cheat code. Any power honed through raw physical talent stayed active forever, ignoring his class limits, so as he leveled up, his deadly blade skills and holy magic would keep stacking and changing, sparking a memory of Isabella's ultimate divine aura, the peak of healing, making him realize that if he had taken that god-tier buff in his first try, history would have taken a completely different turn. But this time, he flipped the board, crafted an unstoppable frontline killer who could heal forever, and walked calmly into the very death trap that had once broken him, now fueled by icy anger instead of fear. But today, with sword mastery burned deep into his very soul, he stood apart, ready to strike without a single moment of doubt. He focused his mind and walked straight into the dark pit. The world twisted and dropped him right into a suffocating black forest, where a glowing screen flashed a strange title called Green Red, but he wasn't here to play tourist, so he pushed deeper into the bushes and quickly found out why the place felt so wrong. He nearly stumbled over the absolute carnage, as the dirt was thick with a huge pile of torn-up goblin bodies. As you looked over the crime scene, it was obvious these people weren't just fighting, they were running for their lives from something much scarier than anyone else there. Their faces were frozen in pure terror as a nasty, bone-rattling growl echoed through the trees, and he whipped his head around to instantly lock eyes with the culprits, two massive hulking hobgoblins casually dragging the shredded remains of their last meal. Get those weak little green grunts from before, because these hobgoblins were built like tanks, savage and insanely deadly, and the moment they saw the boys standing there, their ugly faces lit up with excitement. In this dungeon, human flesh is a prized delicacy, so they wasted no time tossing their useless loot aside to aim their rusty, blood-stained blades at him while drooling over the idea of a fresh, warm snack. But the funniest part was that they had no idea the human they wanted to eat wasn't a helpless target, but the real apex predator. So when the first giant brute charged right at him like a freight train and slashed where his head used to be, he simply phased right through it. Statistically, he was way too weak for this gang, and his current sword couldn't easily slice through that tough leather armor. But brute force wasn't enough. He needed to land a perfect blow. He moved like a shadow, closed the distance to the first giant, and drove his steel right through its eye, causing the monster to let out a blood-filled scream that shook the entire forest. True to his nice guy nature, Suho ended the beast's suffering by cutting its lifeline completely. Honestly, it was a total mess on his part because his muscle memory went wild and his punch ended up way too deadly. He just wanted to grind the guy for experience and new skills, but he accidentally one-shot him instead. Turning his attention to the last brute, he decided to squeeze every drop of value out of it. Seeing his friend fall, the second beast went crazy, screaming and swinging wildly while our hero calmly floated out of every strike like a butterfly, eventually unlocking a dodge ability by spamming one move and then switching stances to flawlessly bat away the giant's frantic slashes. A solid parry isn't just for show, it's the essential foundation of hand-to-hand fighting and the key to unlocking the best combat skills. That move was a must-have in his collection, and after 2 perfect blocks, the magical ping rang in his ears, marking Parry's new skill as learned. Sadly, his big training dummy was finally giving up the ghost, stumbling back and panting as if it were done for, so he calmly ended its misery by slicing its head off just to clear the way. Feeling a rush of excitement over his 2 new powers and his addiction to grinding for more experience and strength, while outside the portal, the local raid squad was getting really angry because some stranger had taken over their official dungeon. When the rumor spread through the crowd and chaos erupted, offended players players plotted revenge on the rogue athlete, while down the street, a local responder secretly shared secrets with top officials from the big leagues. They were hunting for answers with Suho as their target, and the firefighter gave them the raw truth. From his view, this kid was way above average trash because he single-handedly wiped out a whole wave of infected, healing himself while tearing through the enemy, leaving one suited agent completely stunned to see the entire camp reduced to a graveyard just as he arrived on time. The wildest twist was that the man behind this massacre was supposedly a healer who first laughed it off as a joke, but since he really did clear a goblin gate alone, the guild had to grab him immediately because a support class doing that much solo damage was impossible. Cut back to our boy Suho, who was right in the thick of it. Man treated the hobgoblins like an endless XP farm, gliding through the chaos like a ghost to slice off multiple ugly heads in one fluid motion, with every swing being perfectly efficient and wasting no energy. He intentionally left one ugly monster alive because Suho's terrifying glare made the beast flee, and he was using that trembling creature as bait to draw out the others so he could check his new boosted stats. Looking down at the huge pile of green bodies, he suddenly realized this wasn't a graveyard but a literal gold mine. Hidden deep inside those twisted slimy guts were the magic stones. Sure, they were low-grade trash, but at 50,000 each, the cash pile added up fast enough to make getting his hands dirty totally worth it. A terrifying rush of bloodlust hit him just as he spun around to see 30 huge hobgoblins stomping toward him, with one right at the front. It was the very same rat he had just chosen to let live. As soon as they locked eyes with their target, the whole crowd let out a deafening roar and charged at him all at once, but did our hero even flinch? He didn't just move a little, he shot off the ground like a dark shadow and struck with the scary speed and perfect aim of a master killer. In a flash, half a dozen bodies hit the floor, sending ugly green heads bouncing around the dungeon as he danced through them like they were warm butter, and right then the system chimed with a sweet level-up notification that flooded his profile with fresh points, surging his raw power to a whole new tier, so he knew it was finally time to quit. With no time left to waste, he plunged into the heart of the swarm, becoming a deadly whirlwind of steel that tore through the horde without a second thought until a fearless oddball charged right at him, forcing Suho to grin with pure excitement as he embraced the thrill of facing the dungeon's toughest boss, a level 20 chief hobgoblin. The giant brute showed off its power by lunging for a deadly hit, missing completely only to be met with a rear attack from a group of minions that Suho saw instantly thanks to his eyes in the back of his head. He chopped them up without a second glance, so the boss swapped raw power for a scary fear attack to show this wasn't some ordinary monster. The boss's power froze your muscles and crushed your mind with fear, making you even more helpless the better you got at fighting, which was a wild and terrifying shock to see in such a low-level place. The real danger was that Suho had no mental defenses or shields to stop the mind games, leaving him wide open to the illusion. Sensing victory, the chief charged forward for the kill, but the giant made a fatal mistake by forgetting that Suho wasn't a weak beginner, but a hardened veteran who ate nightmares for breakfast. So without hesitation, Suho grabbed his own blade and slashed his left arm to break the stun. The shock of pain broke the numbness, letting him dodge the boss's big swing and then rush past him to blast every tiny enemy into colorful pieces. In under 10 seconds, the whole mob was wiped out, leaving the room deathly quiet with only the boss left standing. Before turning around, he quickly patched up the cut he'd given himself so he could finally face his opponent alone with no distractions left. The beast's eyes showed pure panic, proving its smug confidence was gone forever. The fight turned into a wild mess as both fighters traded huge, ground-shaking hits, but Suho soon realized his attacks were too weak to break the monster's tough skin, proving that charging in like a tank just wouldn't work. Time to turn things around, so Suho stopped hitting buttons like a mindless machine, carefully aimed his blade at the monster's huge thigh, and sank it in deep to leave it unable to move. Panicking, the boss desperately tried to scare Suho with its old fear trick, but it was useless now that Suho had already crushed that nightmare, and kept slashing its bleeding weak spot over and over again. After a few deadly exact blows, the giant beast crashed to the ground, panting for air and barely clinging to life, but Suho wasn't ready to stop yet. Instead of killing his enemy, he suddenly cast a healing spell that washed over the opponent with pure recovery. The bruised monster, dizzy and bleeding, couldn't believe it when the guy who just tore it apart suddenly started acting like its doctor. He slices the beast clean in half. According to him, a hero is someone who saves their friends, but now, instead of being an unstoppable monster, the dungeon boss was shaking from fear and couldn't even look the kid in the eye. After squeezing every last bit of fun out of that run, Suho finally hit the limit and with the beast's usefulness finally gone and the tutorial done, Suho didn't even flinch as he casually chopped off its head to finish the grind, earning a system announcement that made him the raid's undisputed MVP, while his character leveled up to 10, a huge milestone for any awakened fighter. Even his basic healing spell jumped to rank E, but the real treasure was unlocking a brand new power called Cure. Sure, it looks pretty basic right now, but if he keeps growing at this insane rate, he'll soon be wiping out 10,000 deadly poisons with a snap, and this was just the start of an unbelievable journey. With the treasure safe and the boss down, Su spun around and walked toward the glowing exit, while the real world buzzed with heavy anxiety. The ground shook violently, sending terrified whispers through the crowd as everyone wondered if the raid was finally over. Just as the rumors started to spread, the portal rippled and Suho stepped out with a cool, confident swagger, completely unfazed by the disaster he'd just left behind, looking fresh and relaxed while the rest of the world was in chaos. The crowd stood stunned, trying to figure out this strange anomaly, while top guild reps quickly swarmed the scene looking for the lone wolf who had just soloed a dungeon, but Suho simply ignored their offers and flashy cards, refusing to play the game. He pushed his way through the crowd and stood right in front of a man wearing a sharp business suit. So casually waved at young Chulin, the top hunter from South Korea, who froze in shock like a deer hitting headlights, clearly unprepared for a stranger who had just walked right through a portal. The scene shifted to the sleek Hunter Association offices, where team leader Young sat across a desk from Suho, looking like just another boring paperwork session to anyone watching, though Chulman's mind was racing back to their strange first meeting and Suho's casual claim that he was heading to the headquarters, something Chulman at first thought was just a normal stop for a fighter to renew his license. As they talked, a wild truth dropped. Suho was actually here for his first registration, which completely threw Chulman off, especially since the supposedly weak healer rookie had just soloed a deadly rift while casually snacking, leaving Chulman frantically refreshing his stats to make sense of a guy who looked like a veteran fighter instead of a healer. Just as Chulman began to spiral in his own head, Suho cut through the quiet with a casual question about what was wrong, instantly pulling the recruiter back to reality, only for Chulman to shake it off and launch into the standard interrogation routine about the past, schooling and all the boring details. Suddenly, all the strange pieces clicked together. Our boy Suho had skipped out on university to drop his physical education major before it was even halfway done. Typically, the tough fighters from that program wake up ready to charge like warriors, but Suho shocked everyone by choosing to heal instead because he absolutely hated getting hurt, and then he calmly explained his plan for the dungeon raid. He laid out the timeline with zero emotion, keeping his tone flat and clinical, deliberately leaving out the fact that he absolutely steamrolled the entire zone while playing it cool by claiming he just scraped by to stay alive. But when Suho casually mentioned a hobgoblin boss named Chulman, the veteran froze in alarm, knowing such dungeons are deadly traps, yet Suho didn't even blink as he dumped his entire loot mountain onto the desk, nearly sending Chulman into a panic while the recruiter's mind briefly short-circuited. Right before him sat a huge pile of monster parts, ripped from the goblin horde, with the shiny crystal the boss dropped sitting right in the middle. Suho didn't even notice the crazy bag he just won, and politely asked if they could cash it out, while Chulman kept his cool on the outside but stared with wide eyes at the legendary jackpot inside. Straining to breathe, the man locked eyes with the kid and demanded with deadly seriousness if he truly wanted to walk the path of an awakened, and after Suho gave a firm nod, a massive spark of excitement ignited inside the recruiter as he fought to keep his professional mask on, probing to see if this was just a teenage phase before the boy smiled softly and shut that down immediately. While the recruiter celebrated securing a prodigy, the atmosphere in the room suddenly took a dark dive as Suho finally dropped his true motive, revealing that he didn't care about clout or money, but felt pure unfiltered hatred for the beast and the rifts that spawned them. As a lonely kid left with only rage after his family vanished in a savage dungeon raid, he hunted monsters to feel something other than the deep unhealing pain inside him, only to realize that while he couldn't change the past, he could finally choose who lived in the future. He refused to let another kid suffer, swinging his blade as a shield instead of a weapon of vengeance, driven by a burning desire to fight on the front lines with the government squad rather than sell out to a corporate guild. Shman was completely stunned by this kid's intense presence, but as an experienced pro, he had to give him a harsh wake-up call. He laid it out straight. The government paycheck was trash compared to the massive contracts Private Corps threw around, but Suho didn't care about the money drop since VIP dungeon farming access, and the right to humble rogue awakeners made it a total win for him. The recruiter was so shocked her brain felt like it had shorted out. This is the wild part. Although the state says it gets first pick of the rifts, they usually just sell those permits to whoever will pay the most. It's crystal clear that no bureaucrat would gamble their safety for a pitiful paycheck. Everyone talks a big game about being a hero, but deep down they'd rather sit behind a safe desk, collect their pension, and avoid facing any monsters, which is why there's a huge line of people begging to just do paperwork. Coleman stared at So and saw something rare in a greedy world. A kid who hated easy paths, acted like a guardian ready to face danger, truly believed in his promise, and made Coleman nearly faint with pure joy. He forced himself to focus again and turned back to look at the huge pile of monsters. But here's the catch. To get an official license, new pilots had to pass a written test and survive a terrifying real-world battle. The biggest problem was clear. The sign-up deadline was long gone, and the real tests were starting tomorrow. Luckily, our hero turned Cholman into a huge fan, which meant he could solo the dungeon and earn a golden ticket that would let him charm the big bosses and get special access, though that was just the easy part. The only thing keeping Shman awake at night was the written exam, and for an ordinary person like him, cramming for it in just one day was completely impossible. Our guy Suho was built different, with a simple mindset: if a door opens, you just kick it down. But the only catch was that our boy had absolutely no money, not even enough for the entrance fee, so with his head held high but his pockets empty, he had to swallow his pride and ask team leader Coleman to sell the magic crystals for him. And Coleman, a true legend, grabbed the job instantly, becoming Suho's only hope and earning his deep respect. After some time passed, they breezed through the physical challenges, and team leader Cholman sent the cash from the crystal hall via wire. The scene shifts to Suho raiding Cholman snacks like a king in his own right, pocketing 3 million in crystal and landing perfectly with the extra tax-free perks from his new role as a civil servant hunter. But he wasn't finished. He needed just one more solid, knowing the association hid a secret library where he could grind for his test tomorrow. He made a polite request to get in, and Cholman grinned instantly, giving him the go-ahead without any hesitation. He even acted as a tour guide, leading Suho all the way to the doors and telling him he could skip the ID check. Before leaving, Cholman pumped him up for the big exam. Watching Coleman's back, Suho admired his unwavering loyalty and knew deep down that Coleman was meant to lead the entire organization one day. With his friend out of the way, Sual locked onto his real target inside the library, hunting for a memory from his past life that felt like nothing but static noise in his mind. But just as he tore through the aisles and snatched up a massive, impossible-looking book, a strange system message chimed to tell him he'd found something completely alien to their world. The hint suggested there was a secret trick far more than just turning pages, and Zuho instantly recognized the pattern. Without hesitation, he lifted the huge book over his head as if he'd just unlocked a special secret in a game. For a hot minute, he felt like a total clown as nothing happened. His arms burned, and frustration spiked because he bet his life this was the trigger. Just as he was about to roast the silly book, the system chimed once more. The Library of Memories was so captivated by his backstory that it couldn't stop itself from wanting to learn everything about him. With a burst of magic, the cover began to throb, reality started to flicker, and suddenly the dusty archives vanished right before his eyes. Instantly, he found himself looking down at a huge tree from another world, with roots sinking into glowing rock and branches reaching toward a sky that felt like a fake dream, while a giant spiral staircase wrapped around the trunk and vanished into nothingness, marking the entrance to the Library of Memories. The twist is that this place gives you a perfect memory of every life moment, even your darkest nightmares, trapping you with a mind that never lets you forget like humans usually do to survive pain. The original master of this power was the manager of the Hexagon Guild, a special worker for the Hunter Association. While trying to study hard for a new career, she accidentally unlocked a god-tier power by using her book as a pillow because sleeping on her face was too uncomfortable. Toho chuckled at her wild luck but felt grateful for help, so he promised to treat her to a fancy meal later. A new window popped up, forcing Suho to give up his own story to the library. He let the sheer power of this ability sink in, realizing it was the only way to fix his fading and glitching memories and keep his past perfectly intact. The ding signaled that his story was accepted, and suddenly a fierce wind swirled around him as the system announced his life files were downloading, lifting him weightless into the air with glowing runes while a mystical hologram powered up above the book. Just as the last warning flashed, the Library of Memories officially woke up. Su stares at his own hand, stunned by a glitchy recording that feels like a twisted illusion, so he immediately shuts his eyes to dive back into a past raid, where he sees his bloodied body and feels the terrifying reality of the trauma that fills him with rage. He stares with hatred at the cowards who let him die to stay safe, and while his mind drifts into a void of glowing screens, the painful memory makes him sick and regretful, only for a red holographic alert to suddenly flash on the screen. After hitting the ultimate power limit and becoming the absolute first, the system gives him a literal cheat code to keep growing, causing a hard reboot just for him as he steps into a transcendent new era. His jaw drops as the digital darkness shatters and snaps him back to reality, but then he pauses to wonder if that crazy system actually just rewound time. Suddenly, he remembers the time he broke open the realm of unity, swung his holy sword, and earned his very first double S-rank skill. But here he stands at the very top of transcendence, having received a complete fresh start that no one in history has ever achieved. Zuho smiles as he slips through, knowing it wasn't luck, then cuts to the next scene where his taxi screeches to a halt, dropping him off at his destination as he steps onto the pavement and realizes the heavy weight of his second life. He's now playing with a loaded deck and has one shot to rewrite history by smashing through those deadly gates before they can wipe out thousands of innocent lives again, forcing him to rush through these dungeons with all his speed. Time is slipping away, so there's no room for laziness. He pulls up to the giant glass-walled skyscraper called Nexus, which looks scary enough to make anyone nervous, but he knows it's his personal money vault for all his big dreams, and walks in with total confidence to talk to the cheerful receptionist. Suho is totally calm, so he walks straight up to director Kim Sua, who is so surprised she stammers to ask if he even made an appointment, but he just shrugs and leans in to drop a huge bombshell. The guy who cleared the Sinandorum station all by himself before the disaster is waiting in the lobby, and right now they are standing in her massive office where a cool executive named Kim Sui meets him to hear about her new student An Suho. She gestures for him to take a seat, offering a sharp, calculating smile as she praises his crazy run through the Sinandorum dungeon before leaning forward to ask why a monster like him is on her turf, only to have his answer, that he wants a full-ride scholarship and is taking the hunter's license exam tomorrow. Short-circuit her brain. She's so desperate to understand this kid that she asks exactly how long ago his awakening started. Today, he answers with a flat tone that makes her jaw drop, and as she frantically flips through his files, muttering his stats in disbelief, she realizes an unregistered nobody who just got his powers hours ago wants to take the licensing exam tomorrow after soloing a massive disaster zone. He gives a smug grin, confirms every crazy detail, and even shows off how he used his big connections in the Hunter Association to skip the weight rule, all while being so sure he'll win first place that the director is left completely speechless. Then he lays his cards on the table, and once he crushes the competition to take the top spot, he demands VIP status at Nexus with every single expense paid. Suho isn't fooled by the rookie's bold claim because he's secretly holding a game-changer ticket, while hiding the fact that this fresh-faced challenger is actually a ruthless veteran who has cleared more dungeons than most guilds combined. Meanwhile, Kim is sweating as she warns him that the official exam is a brutal meat grinder with a survival rate under 20%, but he doesn't care since he's a god-tier talent ready to face it alone. So doesn't even blink as he slams down a zero-risk guarantee, promising that if he can't take the top spot they can just tear up the contract and act like he never showed up at all. Kim narrows her eyes at his crazy bet, wondering why anyone would choose Nexus instead of top giants like Hexagon or Prime. Juho speaks bluntly, admitting that while his team is physically giant, they've been slumping lately with no top-tier winners and dropping enrollment, so Kim can't argue as her empire desperately needs a miracle from this wild kid to seize all the fame if he somehow wins first place. Yet she stares at him deeply shaken, wondering how such a crazy person could walk into a serious meeting and gamble his whole career without even sweating. Driven by fierce curiosity, she pushes him to admit exactly what kind of reward he is really chasing. Suho turned the tables and demanded the exact reward for his victory, breaking down the prize pool of tuition forgiveness, a massive 30 million cash bonus, and VIP entry to the elite Nexus Guild, before grinning wickedly and dropping a bombshell that 300 million would make it an absolute steal, leaving director Kim stunned as Suho calmly explained why dominating at such a powerful academy made that huge payout easy money for the nation's top school. She gritted her teeth, finally gave in, sealed the deal, took the top spot, and let that. As Suho wandered the massive self-contained campus that felt more like a city than a school, he watched his exhausted tour guide proudly claim it as South Korea's biggest academy before feeling bad for the overworked staff member and noticing a lone figure training late, who turned out to be the legendary defensive powerhouse Suho had once fought alongside in his past life, only to see him now awkwardly wielding a battle axe instead of his shield, making Suho realize he could fix this mistake and turn the guy into a perfect member of his future team. After the guide finished his quick intro, Suho immediately asked Dehan if he was really serious about using that heavy battle axe as his main weapon. He realized that switching weapons was a total waste of time, especially after 2 years of struggling with the axe and still moving clumsily, so Suho's sharp mind instantly spotted the fatal flaw in that whole plan. The guy was working his tail off until he was dripping with sweat, but the harsh reality was that his axe just didn't fit his way of playing. He gave it a perfect effort, but followed a terrible plan, and he should have ditched the weapon the moment his stats stopped going up. Suho couldn't believe how the best school on the peninsula missed such an obvious sign, so he decided to drop some serious reality check wisdom. Since the game gives us ridiculous stat boosts anyway, sticking with a weapon that feels wrong is basically throwing away the adventure, because while the system might carry our skill rating, surviving a real dungeon depends entirely on our own quick thinking and natural reflexes. Skoho gave the guy high praise for his hard work, but then smoothly showed that his real superpower was standing as an unbreakable shield for everyone else. He strapped on a huge kite shield to his left arm, gripped a bone-shattering mace in his right, and swapped into this deadly setup to instantly become a far more dangerous and survivable warrior on the battlefield, just as Suho said. Panic hardened Dehan's eyes as he realized that changing his game just one day before the biggest test of his life was a huge risk. Yet Suho looked right through him and made Dehan wonder who truly leads a group when disaster strikes. While beginners always cheer for the flashy mages, the true backbone of any team is the tank, a solid wall that soaks up all the attacks to keep everyone safe. And to master this role, you need a heavy shield to block the blows, and a blunt weapon to freeze enemies and keep the chaos under control. The logic struck with such force that the puzzle pieces finally fell into place, leaving Dehan pumped to make the ultimate switch, while Suho grinned in satisfaction, knowing this future powerhouse had the elite adaptability to survive instead of freezing in fear. Throwing up a quick peace sign for good luck, Suho watched his companion bounce as the guide casually revealed that Director Kim had personally ordered this midnight VIP stroll, which explained the earlier mention of a special guest, leaving Suho's mind spinning in disbelief over whether this kid was actually a master instructor in disguise. So he quickly played the "I'm just an instructor" card, knowing that dropping expert-level knowledge without a license looked sketchy, and smoothed things over by calling himself a private stakeholder. The official gave a nod, confirming the message had arrived and the papers were done, so it was time to head back to the director's suite before reaching the big day of the hunter exam. Outside the headquarters, a sea of nervous new recruits jangled their cold badges in desperate hope of acceptance, having pushed themselves to the breaking point to earn them, while the legendary beast who just soloed a dungeon. After finishing the test, he stepped outside and wondered about its real purpose. The entire operation was just a huge anti-doping trap, but So thought it was a terrible idea because the real cheaters weren't taking pills. They were secretly hiding stat boosts, and he had already spotted one girl and a whole squad glowing with power levels far above the normal 5. And on cue, the system pinged to confirm his sensory stats were off the charts, meaning his magic detection was totally maxed out. Now spotting the problems was as easy as breathing. The obvious abuse everywhere made him realize it was time to finally close this ridiculous circus. When Suho spotted Cholman, he felt a wave of relief to finally see someone truly honest in the group. Hoping past students stressing over their test scores, he couldn't stop the strange thought that his superhuman powers felt like a glitch in the game. Coleman jogged over to check on his exam results. Edo brushed it off with a shrug, knowing he'd already passed, and then wondered why the older guy was still hanging around, only to hear Shmun sigh and admit he was just doing glorified security because the group was way too short on staff. He mentioned rumors that this year's test was brutally difficult, making Suho's calm attitude seem seriously impressive, but our boy just shrugged off the praise and smoothly changed the subject, while Chulman gave him the green light with a warning not to ask for answer keys, causing Suho to smirk and drop a bombshell by suggesting the proctors weren't even scanning for active aura enhancements during the exam. Shmun blinked in confusion, completely baffled by the idea of buff checks, while Suho explained that although they tested for steroids and stripped away magic, they remained totally blind to the invisible boost to skill. He shared a clever secret, sending out sensory hunters would instantly spot and remove all the fakes. Aim's eyes sparkled with hope as he promised to fix that gap before the big physical test, so Zuho gave a thumbs up and headed off to get ready. Just as he was about to dive in, Shman held him back, truly hoping our hero would pass the test so they could fight side by side. He sent some good energy to Suho for the fight, which he happily took, but just half an hour later, a loudspeaker roared with a 2-hour delay caused by broken simulation pods, telling the restless crowd to head to the food court while they waited in the holding pens. Suho didn't buy the excuse for a second because it sounded like panic damage control, signaling that his boss was ruthlessly slashing through the crowd of 1,200 hopefuls to purge anyone faking it, dropping the survival odds from 10% down to a terrifying 7% so that whoever made it through this bloodbath would be undeniably elite. Zuho leaned back and looked around the room to find any interesting things to watch. Suddenly a loud fight burst into the calm silence. A loudmouth was aggressively trying to force a duel, but the victim just barked at him to chill and step back. The aggressor just smirked, pretending it was friendly practice, while mocking the victim for being scared to show off his terrible skills. The defender, fed up, shoved the bully away and demanded some room. The bully's grin twisted as he raised a wooden training blade to dare the guy, but before the fight could start, Suho stepped in and effortlessly deflected the strike, forcing the bully to stumble back. The victim stared in shock, wondering if our boy had a death wish, but Suho kept his cool and smoothly claimed the situation while telling the victim to stay out of it, only for the bully to sneer and demand to know if Suho was undercover security. Ho calmly called the attacker an idiot, telling the scared victim that fighting him would ruin their exam score, so stepping back was the smart move, which made the bully glare in anger and demand to know why this random guy was trying to be a hero. The referee stepped between them to enforce the rules, insisting on simple wooden training blades because if things got too rough, he would immediately stop the fight. As the bell rang, the attacker lunged forward with a wild, vicious swing, but Suho blocked it so easily it was like swatting a fly. Wanting to knock him out, the guy jumped up to smash down, only for Suho to easily step aside. With boiling rage and total shock, the attacker screamed that he was going to tear Suho apart.
Yuho didn't even try to defend himself. Instead, he stomped his boot down hard, trapping the man's wooden sword on the ground and sneering, "You're truly pathetic," which completely crushed the guy's pride.
This aggressive hothead, Park Yong, was a true battle junkie, whose whole life was spent hunting down tough fighters and starting fights. His dangerous hunger for power had turned him into a deadly threat in the ring, and Suho instantly knew him from a past life, seeing how lethal Yong once was, so spotting him in this new group was a huge warning sign that made Suho realize he had to stop him before history repeated itself. Finally, Suho kicked out with all his might, sending Yong sliding hard across the floor. Suho towering above him, he coldly hurled the bully's own trash talk straight back at him. Shell-shocked, Yong demanded to know how Suho was hitting so hard, only for Suho to drop a harsh reality check that rushing in blindly was pure suicide, and implied that battle junkies like Yong had never faced the terrifying power of a level 10 fighter, noting that up until now, Yong had likely just been bullying level 5s. Yang wiped his mouth with a twisted smirk, saw Suho staying cool as ice, and declared he was finally throwing away the training wheels, to which Suho just laughed and said, "Bring it on." Yang unleashed a wild storm of blows, yet Suho moved like a dancer through the chaos, completely safe even as he held the sword with a single hand. Yang swung with deadly force, pressing Suho to his breaking point until Yang unleashed his final trump card, the legendary dragon sword technique. The whole arena burst into a blinding flash as their wooden blades smashed together, leaving Yang convinced he'd cleaved Suho in half, only for the dust to reveal Suho standing casually unharmed after perfectly deflecting the blow. Trembling and wide-eyed, Yang demanded to know how he survived, but Suho just laughed ruthlessly at Yang's sluggish attempt, revealing the brutal truth that Yang had only managed a cheap, watered-down knockoff because he lacked the official license needed to unlock his true power and execute the real technique. Blinded by shame, Yang charged back in with wild swings, only for Suho to slip past every desperate move like a ghost. Suho dropped low and stood wide open, daring a furious bull to charge right at him. The second, Yang roared in triumph and charged to end the fight. Suho landed a perfect uppercut right into his jaw, knocking the lights out and sending Yang crashing to the mat with his brain scrambling, only for Suho to stand over him and land the final emotional blow to prove he was way too slow. Paralyzed by rage, Yang could only stare at the ceiling while bitterly muttering Suho's name like a curse, allowing Suho to smirk with relief as Yang's dangerous obsession was now fixed entirely on him, leaving the other rookies safe and finally granting the testing facility a moment of peace. Meanwhile, the evaluators on the observation deck stood frozen in shock until Suho waved them to attention, casually shouting that he'd accidentally knocked stepped into the massive high-tech lab filled with dive pods, where he quickly noticed some serious tough guys hanging out who turned out to be undercover anti-doping cops pretending to be regular lab workers. As the waiting room filled with nervous chatter, So rolled his eyes, wishing everyone would just leave, before a tech waved him over to kick back in a chair. The guy rushed through the emergency abort steps just in case Suho's brain started to melt during the dive, but Suho just gave a thumbs up without a care, while the giant rig powered up and heavy cables locked onto his temples. The sleek holographic interface appeared before Hunter, and as his body dissolved into the digital void, the loading bar soared from 5 to 40%, then 77%, before booming straight to 100%. With the link established and the brutal healer test officially begun, Suho's eyes snapped open to find himself in a nightmare world where he instantly realized why so few healers ever made it past the start. The streets had turned into a real war zone where civilians were bleeding, screaming for help, and trapped under huge piles of broken concrete, while right in front of him a girl was ripping her own hands apart to lift a giant boulder off a victim, causing Suho to silently roast the Hunter Association for creating such a crazy test that turned a simple exam into a pure nightmare. Every year they mix up the dangerous situations, so your score changes depending on whether you're fighting alone against huge crowds or healing the team instead of just killing enemies. Magic matters, but for a healer, the ultimate test is stepping in front of the monsters to save their friends. A rule Suo was about to break because his real-world strength made him invincible, leaving him cold and unbothered by the screams of those around him who only saw a scary game. He stepped closer to the shivering girl and quickly checked her condition. Shaking with fear, the pixelated survivor begged him to run before the beast wave crashed down again, but Zuho stayed focused on his main goal. His only goal was to keep her breathing until the timer hit 0, and with a confident grin, he promised that help was coming and no monster would ever harm her again. As he tightened his grip on the weapon and planted his feet firmly, he was ready to kill anything that crossed his path. While back in the control center, tired players stumbled out of their VR pods like burnt toast, with a tired worker mocking one of them for their terrible performance and telling them to pack up and leave. Turning to the next screen, she tapped the monitor to check the logs and saw a bow user named Kang Jin Yang with exactly 9 minutes and 4 seconds left, so she sighed at the tablet and complained about how tough the year's difficulty spike was ruining everyone's scores before casually asking director Shin about Suho's survival timer. Shin casually dropped a bombshell about 30 solid minutes, leaving her jaw on the floor as she echoed the number and refused to believe such an insane duration was possible. She sprinted to the terminal, stared blankly at the glowing 30 minutes, and panicked until Shin calmly explained that Suho was definitely a medic, not a tank, leaving her to call his claim crazy. The director smirked, tapped the glass to point at the blood-soaked blade in Suho's hand, then leaned in so both of them could stare at the live fight on the screen. This terrifying threat turn against the monsters made the examiner doubt his mind, wondering if he was even real or just a support unit, while she panicked out loud, fearing that simply surviving might be counted as losing. But Shin shut that down instantly, because the manual never said you have to die, and the only way to win was to keep the target breathing until the buzzer. Hearing this loophole, she slowly nodded and finally understood the genius move, as the director explained how our hero had checked every single box by staying right next to her, holding the front line, and spamming healing spells all while taking huge risks to keep her safe, making it impossible to kick him out. By linking the clues together, the staff member saw that the entire bracket was already decided. While back on the digital battlefield, Suho was delivering a masterclass in pure violence. He sliced through armored beasts with easy one-hit blows. Even as the game's world faded into pixels, he wasn't done yet because he needed to kill faster. With a cold, steady hand, he wiped out every new horror that appeared until the whole map was silent, only for a bright blue warning to flash in his sight as he finally reached the highest level of his dodging skill. As he scanned the text box, a massive mental shockwave hit him, proving that the VR system tracked his brain movements just like real life, letting him grind out real combat skills in a safe, risk-free training room where he could master blade arts and gain powerful perks without earning loot or levels. Yet the huge boost in his stats still felt like a massive rush. He realized that by pushing his blade skills past the A-rank limit, he might create a legendary move like the Dragon Sword form, but then another holographic banner suddenly tore across his view. A huge achievement was reached as his weapon skills surpassed everyone else, thrilling the AI so much it wanted to save his unique fighting style forever, and offered to mix his powerful hits with quick dodges to create a brand new power. A wicked grin spread across Suho's face as he raised his guardian sword, ready to cement his legacy. A flashing question popped up asking if he wanted to lock in that exact title, so without even thinking, he slammed the accept button, which triggered a glowing blue window to hype him up for his insane mastery, and officially register a brand new one-of-a-kind sword art, bringing the Guardian Sword rank S into existence with a massive 50% boost to every blade attack and movement technique. The Protagonist isn't finished rewarding him, it drops 10 raw stat points as a prize, and flashes a message begging Suho to keep ruling the way of the sword. With a final flash, the ultimate flex lands as he unlocks Sword Mastery S, a legendary rank for true sword gods that instantly breaks every level limit and unlocks new moves, stacking another 50% damage on top of his already insane stats, while wiping out all weapon penalties, making Suho freeze in awe as he remembers how 10 grueling years it once took to grind this out. But now, armed with all his past memories and cheat codes, he's speedrunning his entire journey and knows exactly how deadly he has become. Shaking off his distraction, he quickly calculates the numbers and is left stunned by how much money and effort the Academy poured into this trial, since the mob count was set from the very beginning. With every quest marked, he faces only two paths: be torn apart by the Horde or wipe them all out, while the exam proctors outside stare in stunned silence, jaws dropped as they watch. For the first time in the Academy's history, a lone student wiped out the entire dungeon, leaving everyone who saw his godlike fighting skills absolutely stunned. But the wildest thing is that he actually kept the VIP patient completely healthy, so one judge laughed and said they might as well throw the grading rules out the window because he's already won first place. Later, executives at the fancy Hexagon Guild headquarters are grinning and bragging about their star rookie Khan about to win the top spot, until a scout bursts the door open, reads the results, and reveals that Khan didn't even come in first, sending the room into a panic while Khan's own phone starts ringing off the hook with calls from the Great Hunter Association. The guy sounds totally drained as he apologizes for the late prop since he's been buried in paperwork, but he still makes sure to hype Suho up for nailing a flawless top score, even admitting he never thought a rookie could be this consistently amazing. Suho acts humble and lets the leader take the credit, but the veteran immediately shuts him down, claiming the huge win is all his own, revealing that Suho's incredible performance had accidentally exposed a group of cheaters using illegal drugs to fake their stats, which leads the association to crack down on future tests and makes the leader celebrate a major victory. Then the leader suddenly gets serious and asks the big question. Suho doesn't wait, knowing that even while grinding with his guild today, his ultimate goal remains the same: taking down the association. The leader sighs with relief, promises to text once the schedules are set, and even gives Suho some dad advice to eat well and stay healthy, while Suho happily agrees and sends the good vibes right back. Click. The connection died, leaving the leader at HQ staring blankly at the item, while muttering that he really needs to grab a bite, while Suho just stops walking because the leader's voice is ringing in his head, and he can literally feel that something bad is brewing. But just as he steadies himself, his phone buzzes again, and Suho looks at the screen, instantly knowing who is calling. He grabs it and strikes them with a smooth opening. Kim Soo is buzzing with excitement on the phone as she shares the news of the huge cash payment that just landed in his account, and Suho gives her a respectful nod of the hat, amazed by how smoothly their big group handles its business. After the real reason for her call finally comes out, she drops her sales pitch and begs Suho to sign an exclusive deal with the Nexus Guild, promising perks that will make rival guilds jealous, while Suho smirks and casually tests just how much money they're willing to spend on him as their top prodigy. Kim Soo goes completely crazy, screaming so loudly that the whole office turns to watch her as she begs him not to let any other scouts shoot him. Suho can't help but chuckle at her total panic, promising to meet up soon before the call ends, and he's left smiling as her wild energy still echoes in his ears. Just as the cab driver tapped the glass to signal they'd arrived at the drop zone, Suho tossed a quick thanks and stepped out into the cool city air, letting the reality sink in. The test was crushed, the license was secured, and the cash was already chilling in his account, marking the end of the prologue and the start of the real grind as he locked eyes on the prize and hit the pavement before heading to the Lighthouse General Market to start hunting for loot, scrolling through his phone to check off a supply list that left him nearly fully kitted out except for one deadly piece of hardware he still needed. He left the big stores behind and slipped into a grimy alley shop, hoping this dusty hidden gem held the perfect blade he needed. As the bell rang and he stepped inside, the grumpy shopkeeper stared him down and demanded his order, so Suho acted like a nervous new hunter and asked for something light and quick to use. The old man practically scoffed, pointing a thumb toward the dusty bargain bin in the back where Suho dragged a finger through a thick layer of grime on a true graveyard of unappraised trash known as F-tier gear, with 0 verified stats. But here's the crazy twist: just because something is unappraised doesn't mean it's trash. Some ancient relics are just sleeping, waiting for a special ritual to wake up their godlike power, and while these overpowered weapons send out a tiny magical pulse, no ordinary person could ever spot it until Suho grinned, grabbed a battered spear, and checked his magic sense, only to realize with a wicked smirk that he had finally found his prize. Striding out of the shop with his new toy slung over his shoulder, Suho felt a pang of regret, imagining how the clueless shopkeeper would lose his mind if he knew he'd just sold a legendary artifact for pocket change. But Suho had no time to gloat as he gripped the shaft, closed his eyes, and flooded the rusted metal with raw mana. In an instant, the weapon became a black hole that sucked his energy away so fast he felt his very center vanish, forcing him to rip his hands free and crash to his knees in a cold sweat, with his chest heaving. He knew that if he held on for just one more second, his brain would melt from running out of magic, which was the price to unlock this beast that demanded a magic stat of at least 100. Sure, it was just a big piece of paper for now, but it was his golden ticket to speed up his leveling and break that seal. While at the towering PBS headquarters, the famous reporter Jinwei stared at his ringing phone to see the name Suho. Right from the start, Suho tossed his resume onto the table, proving he was the top scorer from the most recent hunter exams. And he casually dropped that he was the lone wolf who solo cleared the massive chaotic gate break at Sinandorum Station, leaving Jinwei literally out of breath. His mind was spinning trying to handle this flex, because this kid had wiped out a deadly dungeon boss before he even got his plastic ID card, making him look like a total freak to the veteran journalist who saw Suho wasn't just a genius but something completely out of this world. Jinwei calmed himself and asked why this strange being was speaking to him directly. Suho stayed cool after discovering Jinwoo's blog, where he admired the reporter for chasing his passion instead of chasing money, before revealing his plan to take over the internet and dominate every front page. Suho wanted Jinwei to be his only hype man, but Jinwei thought the rookie was just trying to leash a trust fund baby as his personal dog and was ready to walk away. Suho chuckled quietly, admitting the reporter was half right but missing the point, because he wasn't chasing money but rather hunting for pure fame to land a comfy government job. Jinwei's jaw literally dropped as he wondered if this crazy person really meant joining the Hunter Association. Grinding your life off just to get a boring desk job sounded absolutely crazy. But Suho wasn't kidding. He wanted to step inside the Hunter Association's inner workings, and Jinwei instantly realized that Suho wasn't just some rich kid treating this deadly job like a casual weekend hobby. It turns out the guy was truly an orphan, and instead of letting his painful past hold him back, he used it as fuel to protect everyone and tear down every gate blocking his way. Jinwei squinted at his bright laptop screen, trying to guess if the guy was being honest or blowing smoke. The hunting world had become a chaotic mess of strange people lately, making it nearly impossible to tell the real hunters from the fakes, but Jinwei just shrugged off his worries, nodded slowly at Suho's idea, and then firmly shot it down because as a journalist, he had to follow his own leads, and that was all there was to it. But Suho refused to give up, so he threw down a massive bet. With a hook in place, Jinwei leaned in to hear the deal, while Suho promised to earn his trust by showing off his raw hunting skills. The flex was insane because Jinwei's jaw dropped when he announced he'd solo the notorious meat grinder dungeon that even a full elite team would wipe out trying to raid. But Suho didn't even blink, knowing that surviving this nightmare would instantly earn Jinwei's respect. To win, Jinwei had to become his personal hype man, and as Suho looked at him, he suddenly saw the reporter from his past life, a legendary broadcast star who was proud, powerful, and refused to bend the knee for corporate sponsors. In Suho's original timeline, he and Jeannie were an unstoppable team that crushed everything using her sharp instincts and amazing media skills, but that same genius made him too big a target for the powerful bosses, who eventually forced him out of the spotlight and almost erased his legacy. Not this time, as Suho made a silent vow to change that tragic fate, gripping the phone to deliver his final challenge. If he could speedrun the Tower of Challenge all by himself, Jinwei would owe him his life as his private reporter, and the shocked Jinwei swallowed the bait, promising to stand by the crazy kid's survival with everything he had. The call cut off suddenly, leaving Jinwei to drag a hand down his face and stare at the tilted rookie who just got dumped on by Suho after coldly declaring showtime. He couldn't get the sudden aggressive pitch out of his head, leaving his brain doing backflips trying to figure out what the guy really wanted. Underneath the blazing annoyance, a tiny spark of hype flickered because the kid's raw intensity felt real, and he certainly didn't seem like a cheap scammer. So Genie, trapped between frustration and burning curiosity, just mumbled that he was losing his mind before shaking his head and letting it slide as a zero-risk gamble, where a huge win was possible if the kid pulled off the impossible, or nothing mattered if he died trying. Suddenly the scene jumped straight to the scary tower where Suho planted his feet at the dark entrance and flashed his shiny new hunter badge to the guard. A gatekeeper spotted the missing team, flashed a warning stare, and made it clear that flying alone here was basically walking straight to your death. Glancing at the fresh ID number, the guard knew he was dealing with a rookie and urgently shoved him toward a party to warn him that even the lowest floors were full of brutal beatings, but Suho just stared him down and stood his ground. Seeing that wild determination in him, the guard sighed, mentioned the 70,001 entry fee and told him to just pay the bill once the official invoice arrived, which made Suho give a quick thankful nod. As Suho stepped through the doorway, the guard screamed one final desperate plea for him to smash the escape button if things got too intense, but Suho didn't look back. He simply tipped his hat, vanished into the shadows, and walked down the dark hallway, where he learned that this dungeon was a government-funded sandbox built for rookie players under level 20 to grind experience and level up safely. With his entire system wiped clean, he shoved open the heavy iron doors to start his comeback, only for an alert to lock him in while a voice promised he could return to the lobby at any moment by shouting the safe word. But as the glowing interface rose from the floor, he casually pulled a blade from thin air and declared there would be just one boss rush. Boom! A huge slime monster suddenly appeared and tried to bite his throat, forcing Suho to dodge while realizing this slippery beast was far stronger and faster than he thought, which threw off his timing for a split second. Even though the weak slime felt like wet noodle, its bouncy moves were so annoying that Suho had to quickly slash its glowing heart to dust, only to watch it twist into a nightmare as its shattered core instantly spawned a swarm of tiny clones. The system limited how many times they could duplicate, but getting swarmed was still a real danger, so normal hunters refused to run this hellhole without a full squad because mob packs literally attacked every single zone. Without wasting a second on doubt, Suho dove into a killing spree against the growing horde of trash mobs, leaped high to skewer one in midair, then flung his blade across the room to skewer another before a falling slime slapped a sticky tentacle at his face, which he caught mid-swing to stop his fall and use its pull to bounce back up, carving through the wild tangle of limbs with impossible precision until the room was totally empty. A bright message flashed in his mind, confirming his victory and urging him forward as Suho lifted his head, his eyes burning with cold resolve, because he knew 48 brutal floors still waited, and he couldn't stop to rest. The digital bell rang again, unlocking the nightmare of floor 2. Gripping his blade, Suho let his mind drift,